Remember us. Whoever stays until the end will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us.
The Arab group is making waves, publicly calling out Israel and the Biden administration after the recent raid on the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza.
We owe them more than remembrance. Nothing can explain that for 15 months Palestinians in Gaza have endured hell and been abandoned to this fate. Nothing justifies that the doctors who were trying to save lives of victims have become themselves the victims, and that the international community was not able to match even part of their courage and of their dedication to humanity. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh wrote, and I quote, "We will die standing, and we will not kneel. All that remains in the valley are its stones, and we are its stones." End of quotation. Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh was the head of orthopedics at Gaza's Al-Shifa Hospital. He became a familiar face across the globe as his videos showed him operating on the injured and the dying with little or no equipment, or digging mass graves with his colleagues in the yard of the hospital, and finally facing the Israeli assault in a hospital where thousands had sought safety. The Israeli army ordered Al-Shifa, its patients, staff, and approximately 50,000 displaced people sheltering in the compound to evacuate before setting the hospital on fire. Instead of fleeing, Dr. Al-Bursh made his way to the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, where he worked until that too came under fire in November. But refusing to renege on his oath, he moved to Al-Auda hospital, where he was eventually arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. 4 months later, over-prison guards dragged Al-Bursh and dumped him in the prison yard, naked from the waist down, bleeding and unable to stand, according to a deposition collected by Israeli human rights organizations. He died shortly thereafter. The death of Dr. Al-Bursh while in Israeli custody is not a solitary case. Other doctors and many other detainees died while in custody after having suffered from abuse, torture, and rape. Mr. President, this is not a war, and Dr. Tonya has indicated. This is an assault against Palestinian existence. Its target is therefore life itself in Gaza, and all those who are trying to sustain it, all those trying to ensure survival in the midst of this genocide. And according to this criminal intent, it is therefore logical that medical personnel, doctors, nurses, paramedics are among its primary victims. This is immoral. I repeat, this is immoral, unbearable, and must be stopped. The entirety of international humanitarian law rests on a fundamental rule: affording protection to those not taking part or no longer taking part in hostilities. First and foremost, civilians, the sick and the wounded and those detained. Instead of upholding the cardinal principle of distinction, Israel systematically resorts to indiscriminate attacks when it does not deliberately target those afforded protection under international law. Time after time, the same acts, the same patterns, the same criminal and inhumane conduct. Assaults against hospitals leading to the death and detention of civilians, including babies and children who are already experiencing hell on earth. No one should grow accustomed to these horrors. Israel wants to normalize genocide. The report of OHCHR clearly indicates that, and I quote, the attacks on hospitals often followed a similar pattern involving missile strikes on hospital buildings, the destruction of hospital facilities, shooting of civilians, sieges, as well as temporarily taking over hospital buildings. End of quotation. And this is without addressing, again, and I quote, the many cases of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and ill treatment of medical personnel and other Palestinians, including internally displaced persons, IDPs, taken into custody from inside hospitals, which has been reported on elsewhere. End of quotation. This is a barbaric, and it should lead not only to repeated expression of outrage, but rather to resolute action for accountability to prevent the reoccurrence of such horrors. As warned by UN experts, and I quote, under occupation, intentional assaults on healthcare facilities have the potential to expose individuals to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and many constitute a war crime. In Gaza, this is clearly part of a well-established pattern of genocide for which Israel leaders will have to be held accountable. End of quotation. There is no justification for the commission of war crimes. There is no justification for the commission of crimes against humanity. There is no justification for the commission of the crime of genocide. No justification whatsoever. The ICJ provisional measures, orders aimed at preserving the right of the Palestinian people to be protected from acts of genocide, have not only been disregarded by Israel, they have been blatantly breached, materializing the risk instead of addressing it. Mr. President, Israeli action can only be understood in the context of the real goals of this war. Remember, we talked about the report of the generals, which we don't talk about it anymore. Israeli officials and military commanders have often confessed to them. For anyone willing to hear, some they don't want to hear. They like to hear what they like to hear. Israeli occupation soldiers described the actions and instructions of their division chief, division commander of Division 252, Brigadier General Yehuda Vach, stated to Haaretz that his aim was to flatten as much of Gaza as possible to forcibly displace some 250,000 Palestinians who were still present in northern Gaza to take over the land. He's building a private militia from settlers, from relatives, from fanatic soldiers to destroy every day 50, 60 buildings in the Gaza Strip, not to allow Gaza being a place for a single Palestinian to live in it. He was clear that they needed to, and I quote, according to Haaretz, make things hard on convoys that entered and harassed them. Not only there are thieves who steal the trucks, the Israeli soldiers are watching and facilitating this behavior. Insisting, and I continue the quotation, there are no innocents in Gaza. For those of you who think that this is a war against Hamas and not against the Palestinian people, a general, brigadier general, currently in the Israeli army, head of Division 252, there are no innocents in Gaza. Free game, every individual in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people. But his greatest insanity, in the words of one officer of the occupation army, and I quote, was the one about moving the Gazans southward and taking land, as much land as possible. End of quotation. It is a war against the Palestinian people. It is a war of genocide to eliminate as many as possible and to allow the situation in Gaza to be not inhabitable by any individual. They don't want Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and later on in other parts of the occupied territory. Evacuation orders and destruction of civilians' infrastructures, including hospitals, and killings and maiming of civilians, including doctors, have to be understood in this context. Either the Palestinians are displaced or they are destroyed. There is no other option, ethnic cleansing or genocide, and for the time being, it has meant both. Mr. President, the images are out there for all to see of repeated assaults against our hospitals as part of the assault on Palestinian life and Palestinian existence. You can see such assaults also in the West Bank by the Israeli occupation forces. They keep claiming the use of human shields. They say Hamas used the people in Gaza as human shields, saying how outrageous it is for combatants to use human shields or to pretend to be civilians when their occupation forces have done both repeatedly. With occupation forces sometimes disguised as civilians, as patients, even pretending to be pregnant women seeking care with her relatives, have conducted military raids against and within hospitals. That is their behavior. For those who try to lecture to you that others are using civilians and human shields, these evidence, these stories were documented and some were caught in the action. We salute all medical practitioners from around the world who have volunteered to help our people in Gaza, as well as all those who have expressed solidarity and provided support to their colleagues in Palestine. Your moral voices give hope to the Palestinian people and all those who cherish and seek to preserve humanity. Everyone needs to choose if they stand by hope and humanity as embodied by the white coat worn by doctors around the world, or if they stand with destruction and death. And those who say they have made the right choice, need to act accordingly. Mr. President, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyeh stated a few weeks before this ultimate assault on the Kamal Adwan Hospital, and I quote, "I refuse to leave the hospital and sacrifice my patients. So the army punished me by killing my son. I saw him die at the entrance gate of the hospital. It was a great shock. I found a grave for him near one of the hospital's walls so that he could stay close to me." End of quotation. Dr. Abu Safiyyeh was himself injured, and now he has been abducted, detained, his fate unknown. He refused to leave the victims behind. Can't we display some degree of that same courage? The plight of Dr. Hussam Abu Safiyyeh, who must be immediately released, is but one story from Gaza, among an infinite number of stories of unimaginable loss and trauma, and ache and suffering, and courage and resilience. A story of a people who, while receiving solidarity of peoples and countries around the world, feel abandoned to a terrible fate, enduring a never-ending hell. It is our collective responsibility to bring this hell to an end. It is our collective responsibility to bring this genocide to an end. We have a duty to save lives. This Council, you, have an obligation to save lives. Palestinian doctors and medical personnel took that mission to heart at the peril of their lives. They did not abandon the victims. Do not abandon them. End Israeli impunity. End the genocide. End this aggression immediately and unconditionally now. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Algeria. We thank Mr. Volkan-Turk and Dr. Rick Peppercorn for their valuable briefings. And we also extend our deep gratitude to Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan for her sobering briefing, which serves as a powerful testimony from a witness who was present in Gaza and observed firsthand the senseless destruction of health infrastructures and unprecedented atrocities inflicted upon the Palestinian people. The ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza, has a clear and alarming objective: pushing the Palestinian population out of their lands through an obvious and deliberate policy of ethnic cleansing. One of the key pillars of this policy is the systematic destruction, the systematic demolition of the healthcare system. The United Nations Human Rights Office report, published on December 31st, on the eve of the new year, revealed devastating findings. 136 strikes targeted at least 27 hospitals and 12 other medical facilities, resulting in significant casualties and destructions. Figures speak volume. 53% of hospitals in Gaza are no longer operational. Out of 138 primarily health centers, only six remain fully functional. 130 ambulances have been damaged. Over 14,000 patients require urgent medical evacuation abroad, and more 1,000 healthcare workers have been killed, and hundreds of healthcare workers have been detained by the Israeli authorities. NGOs reported on cases of torture, on cases of ill treatment. According to the UN, several physicians have died in Israeli custody. These are but a few examples that starkly illustrate the systematic dismantling of Gaza's health infrastructure, targeting essential services and medical personnel through actions that amount to genocidal tactics. 1 week ago, on December 27, following over 3 months of siege and repeated attack near and around the area, the Israeli occupying forces finally invaded Kamal Adwan Hospital, the main facility in the north of Gaza. This hospital came under assault from snipers, tanks, and quadcopter drones, terrorizing patients and medical staff. These actions included torture, execution, the destruction of vital medical equipment, and the deliberate setting of fires that engulfed entire wards of the hospital. The Israeli occupying forces have actively sought to shut down Kamal Adwan Hospital, rendering it completely out of service. This raises legitimate and critical question about the real motives behind its demolition. However, what is indisputable is that the act was not driven by military necessity, but rather by a deliberate effort to deprive northern Gaza of essential health services, thereby forcing the displacement of its population. The deliberate destruction of healthcare facilities constitute a form of collective punishment, which under international law is classified as a war crime. Is classified as a war crime. Dear colleagues, international humanitarian law is clear regarding the protection of hospitals. Article 11 of Additional Protocol number 2 of Geneva Conventions stipulates, and I quote, medical units and transports shall be respected and protected at all times and shall not be the object of attacks. Resolution 2286 of this very Security Council, I quote again, demands that all parties to armed conflicts fully comply with their obligations under international law to ensure the respect and protection of all medical personnel and humanitarian personnel exclusively engaged in medical duties, their means of transport and equipment, as well as hospitals and other medical facilities. End of quote. To justify these heinous acts, the Israeli occupying authorities have resorted to unfounded allegation claiming that hospitals were being used for military purposes by Palestinian armed group. In the same UN Human Rights Report, however, it is stated clearly, and I quote, and I repeat what has been said by Mr. Turk, and sufficient information has so far been made available to substantiate these allegations, which have remained vague and broad, and in some cases appear contradicted by publicly available information. Yet, arguing based on international law, particularly international humanitarian law and Security Council resolution, feels increasingly futile. What we are witnessing in Gaza, it is a complete disregard for the rule of law. And Israel, as the occupying power of the occupied Palestinian territories, acts as though international law does not exist or simply does not apply to it. These barbaric actions are fueled by a sense of impunity, a sense of immunity. We must end this impunity. We must end this immunity. As Mr. Turk aptly stated, it is essential that there be independent, thorough, and transparent investigations into all these incidents and fully accountability for all violation of international humanitarian and human rights law which have taken place in Gaza. Crimes are being committed in full view of the world, broadcast live and meticulously documented in an era where no act escapes the lens of global scrutiny. Today, ignorance is not a defense. Today, silence is complicity. And the evidence is undeniable. And the suffering of the Palestinians is irrefutable. It is incumbent upon everyone as human beings to take a clear and principled stand. No one can claim ignorance of the blatant violation of international law that continue to unfold before our eyes. Dear colleagues, we cannot afford another year of misery, another year of massacres. Israel's actions are an attempt to extinguish hope in the heart and mind of the Palestinian people, and to deny them the means to survive on their own land. By destroying hospitals, beacons of hope, places of healing, and symbols of humanity, the Israeli occupying power aims to erode the resilience of the Palestinian people. We must act together to put an end to this tragedy. To delay action is to condone injustice. To remain passive is to abandon humanity. It is time for this Council to demand an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. I thank you.
The world's eyes turned to the United Nations in New York as the Security Council convened at Algeria's request. The focus, a controversial Israeli military operation at the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza. Israel claims it was targeting Hamas operatives, allegedly using the hospital as a base. However, the Gaza Health Ministry paints a far more disturbing picture, accusing Israeli forces of storming the facility and setting it ablaze. The IDF, of course, denies these allegations. This incident has amplified tensions, sparking widespread condemnation and reigniting the humanitarian crisis debate in Gaza. Algeria, speaking on behalf of the Arab group, didn't hold back. Their message? A fierce denunciation of Israel's actions and sharp criticism of the Biden administration for its unwavering support of Israel during this crisis. Algeria, a vocal supporter of Palestinian rights, accused Israel of committing war crimes and violating international law. They also criticized Washington for what they described as shielding Israel from accountability. But it wasn't just Algeria. Russia, China, and even some European nations echoed concerns about the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, calling for an independent investigation into the hospital raid. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Should the UN impose stricter measures against Israel, or does Israel have the right to act as it deems necessary for its security? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on this evolving story. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.